If you'd asked me 2 months ago who I was, I would have laughed and given you my name without a second of doubt. Sarah Whitfield, 32 years old, born in Bozeman, Montana. That's who I thought I was my whole life. Then I found a letter in my father's desk, and now I'm not so sure anymore. If you're new here, stick around, because this story gets stranger the further in you go. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, trust me, you're going to want to see where this one ends up. My dad, Walter Whitfield, passed away in March. Heart failure, 68 years old. Gone in his sleep out at the house on Rosewood Lane just outside Bozeman. He'd lived alone since my mom died 11 years back. And it fell on me to clear out the place. Just me, I'm an only child. It took me 3 weekends to get through the garage and the attic. The desk in his study I saved for last, mostly because I wasn't ready for it. That desk had been his since before I was born. Oak, heavy, the kind of thing that outlives everybody who ever sat at it. I went through the top drawers first. Old bills, a broken watch, a photo of him and my mom at the Yellowstone. Overlook back in '89. Nothing that hurt too bad. Then I got to the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck a little. And behind a stack of tax folders from the '90s, I found an envelope that wasn't like the others. It was yellowed at the edges, sealed, and on the front. In my father's handwriting, it just said one word. Not my name, another name entirely. A name I had never heard in my life. I sat there on the floor of that study for a long time just staring at it, my heart going in a way I couldn't explain yet, because some part of me already knew, before I even opened it, that whatever was inside, that envelope was going to take my whole life and turn it sideways. My hands were actually shaking when I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter. My father's handwriting again, and a smaller envelope tucked behind it that I didn't open yet. I remember the light coming through that study window, thin and gray, like even the afternoon didn't want to be there for this. The letter started plain enough. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I never found the right time to tell you this while I was alive. I'm sorry for that. I told myself I was protecting you. Maybe I was just protecting myself. He went on to write that in the fall of 1993, he and my mother had been living outside Missoula, and they'd lost a baby girl. Stillborn, 6 days before her due date. He said my mother never fully came back from that year. Then he wrote something that stopped my breath cold in my chest. 3 months later, a woman we knew from the church, Carol Ann Pruitt, came to us with a baby who needed a home right away. Quiet, no lawyers, no paperwork through the state. We said yes before we even let ourselves think it through. That baby was you. I sat there rereading that same paragraph maybe 6 times. Like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My mother, the woman I grieved for 11 years, wasn't my mother. Not by blood. And the name on the front of that envelope, the name that wasn't mine, my father wrote was the name Carol. Anne had given me before she handed me over. Ellen Ray Pruitt. He wrote that Carol Ann had begged them never to look for her again, said she was running from someone and that the baby, that I, would be safer with a new name and a new life 100 miles away. He wrote that he didn't know if she was even still alive, and that some nights, especially near the end, it was the one thing he couldn't stop turning over in his mind, whether he'd done right by me or just made me part of somebody else's secret. The smaller envelope had a photograph inside. A young woman, maybe 22, 23, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. On the back, in different handwriting, thinner, more rushed, it said, for when she's old enough to ask. I'm sorry I couldn't be the one to tell her myself. C. I looked at that woman's face for a long time. She had my eyes. Not close to my eyes. My exact eyes. My phone was still sitting on the desk where I'd left it that morning. And I remember picking it up with fingers that didn't feel like mine anymore, opening a search bar and typing the name Carol Ann Pruitt into it. Not even sure yet if I wanted an answer or if some part of me already knew that whatever came back was going to change everything all over again. The search came back with almost nothing. A Carol Ann Pruitt in an old church directory from Missoula. No current address, no obituary, nothing recent enough to mean anything. I sat at that desk until it got dark outside, just scrolling. typing every variation of the name I could think of, feeling more and more like I was chasing a ghost my own father had left behind for me on purpose. It was my husband, Mark, who finally talked me into calling the church. First Baptist out on Higgins Avenue, still standing after all these years. I explained who I was, told the woman on the phone I was trying to track down someone who used to attend back in the early 90s. She went quiet for a second, then said the name Carol Ann Pruitt did ring a bell to her. She'd have to check with somebody older who'd been a member longer. 2 days later, a man named Pastor Cole called me back. He remembered Carol Ann. Said she'd left the church suddenly in early 1994, no warning, no forwarding address, and that there'd always been talk, quiet talk, about a man she'd been involved with before that. Someone folks in the congregation were careful never to say too much about out loud. She showed up to Wednesday service one night with the, bruise she tried to cover with makeup, he told me. Nobody asked. That was the culture back then, and I'm not proud of it. Then a few months later, she was just gone. And so was her sister's baby situation, if I remember right. There was some confusion about that. Sister's baby. I asked him to say that again, slower. He said the story around the church at the time was that Carol Ann wasn't the mother at all, that the baby had actually belonged to her younger sister, a girl named Denise, who died not long after giving birth, and that Carol Ann had taken the child to keep her away from the baby's father before anybody official got involved. I had to sit down on the stairs right there in my own hallway. Denise? Not Carol Ann. My birth mother might have been a woman who died before. I was even old enough to be handed off. And the man everyone in that church was too afraid to name. Out loud might have been the reason for all of it. Pastor Cole gave me one more thing before we hung up, almost like he wasn't sure he should. He said the family had roots out in a small town called Ennis, down near the Madison River, and that if anyone still remembered the full story, it'd be somebody out there. Somebody old enough to have known Denise before any of this happened. I stood in my kitchen that night with Mark's hand on my shoulder, staring at that photograph of Carol Ann, or maybe not Carol Ann at all, holding a baby that might not have even been hers to hold, and I knew there was only one thing left to do. I was driving to Ennis. Ennis wasn't much. One main street, a diner, a gas station, mountains standing over all of it like they'd seen everything and said nothing. I found the local library first. An old woman there named Ruth who'd lived in that valley her whole life. And when I said the name Denise Pruitt, her face changed right in front of me. Denise Pruitt, she said slowly. Lord, I haven't heard that name in 30 years. She told me Denise had worked at the diner down the street back in the early 90s. Sweet girl, barely 20, and that she'd gotten involved with an older man passing through. Someone connected to a logging outfit. Someone with a temper the whole town had learned to steer clear of. Ruth said Denise died of complications a week after giving birth, out at a clinic 2 counties over, and that Carol Ann had shown up within days, taken the baby, and vanished before anyone could ask too many questions about the father. Is he still alive? I asked, my voice barely holding together. Ruth looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding something. Then she told me his name, Daniel Voss. She said he'd left Ennis not long after Denise passed, and as far as anyone knew, he was still out there somewhere near Butte, going by the same name, never married, never had other children that anyone in town ever heard of. I didn't go find him. Not that day, not yet. I sat in my car outside that library for close to an hour, just breathing, thinking about a 19-year-old girl who never got to hold her own baby longer than a few days, and a sister who broke every rule she had to keep that baby safe from a man this whole town was still afraid to say too much about. I went home to Bozeman knowing more about myself than I had in 32 years, and less certain than ever about what to do with any of it. I still have that photograph on my nightstand. Denise, 22 years old, holding a yellow blanket, holding me. Some nights I look at it and just say thank you, quietly, to a woman I never got to know, who gave up everything so I'd get the life I got to have. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, drop a comment, and let me know what you'd have done in my place. Subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.